Hello and welcome to AXSchat. Today we've got Kathy Bernhardt from the Tangram Way with us. Delighted to have you here, Kathy. I know you've joined us on AXSchat on the Twitter chat a few times. It's great to have you with us. Can you tell us a little bit more about A, yourself, and B, the Tangram Way? We're really keen to share what you do with our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So glad to be here today. Tangram Way, the Tangram is actually an organization here in Indianapolis. I am the managing director for Tangram Business Resourcing, which is a part of Tangram. Tangram Business Resourcing is an organization and that is a consulting side of our business. And we consult with businesses to help them with their strategies and also with the recruitment and hiring people with disabilities. That includes the gamut of doing disability awareness training, doing assessments, looking at their culture, and really some of our best work, I believe, is the partnership that we build within the community those businesses are in, so they know where to connect on the different types of different types of positions they're looking for.
Fantastic, and we're all very keen on making sure that people can have meaningful jobs, and I think it's really important to have all of the different parts of that sort of equation of getting people into jobs, teaching companies how to be disability confident as employers and as employees, to create that kind of virtuous circle where people are included and are able to have really good, meaningful work. So I know Antonio and Deborah have both got questions. They're fighting it out in the side chat here to see who goes first. But I think, Antonio, you were quickest off the draw, so you go first, mate.
Thank you for joining us today, Katie. Over the last 2 years, we have the chance of talking with the different people across the world about employment and in the space of disabilities. So I'm quite curious to know in what industry you are able to find more interest in relation to the work that you are doing. Is there any specific area that you find, in technology, in retail? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Really, there's industry that we have found that is interested. I know a lot of people go to the retail or distribution side. We are actually working for a national retail chain at this moment. However, they also have call centers, and they also have distribution centers, and they also have their corporate offices. So I think that there's not a particular industry that we particularly work with, or that we have found that is interested in looking into hiring people with disabilities. I hope that answered your question. I think the biggest thing we find is that some companies try to put disabilities in a box, and that tends to provide some issues within the industry. If you say only these type of disabilities do well at this particular job, which isn't true. We know disabilities is different, just like we are different. Just because one person has a certain type of disability doesn't mean it fits the other person with the same type of disability. So it really is across industry.
And do you feel that no? Besides that, they also the companies that you work with, they also encourage their employees to disclosure their disabilities, or this is part of that cultural process that you were mentioning in the beginning?
It is part of the cultural process, and I think almost any company, especially in the U.S. with the new regulations of really trying to have 7% of their workforce being with those with disabilities, that more and more companies are wanting people to self-disclose. However, as we probably all know, that not everyone wants to self-disclose they have a disability. But when you have a welcoming culture, and that's one of the things that we try to really consult on with the businesses, is the welcoming and open culture, that environment that you have, more than likely your employees will self-identify, but not always. That's never going to be a guarantee. It's where that person feels it's necessity or wants to. But our job, really what we try to do is to make sure that those companies have that culture environment that is welcoming to everybody, not just people with disabilities, but with everybody. And then that just builds the whole workforce. I truly am. I hope within like 10 years that we're not having these conversations anymore, that hiring people with disabilities is just like hiring anybody else, and the companies are doing it just as second nature as they're hiring somebody without a disability.
That's a really good point too. And I know that we were recommended to talk to y'all by one of our community people,
Yeah.
Valerie Stoll, whose daughter Sarah of Sarah's Good Day joined our chat a few years ago, and Valerie just had so many positive things to say about your group, and so we really wanted to talk to y'all about, how you're doing it. I talk to people about employment all over the world, and often to me sometimes when companies from another country come to the U.S. and try to figure out how in the world they're going to do business here in the U.S., because in the U.S. we have so much compliance, so much legislation and litigation. And I know a United Kingdom company came to me one time and they said, well, we want to ask them all these questions, and they need to looking at this from the employer, they need to tell us what type of disability they have, and they start going down. I said, well, in the United States you can't ask people with disabilities to disclose. And they're like, well, how are we supposed to do our job if people don't disclose that they have a disability? And they were just really perplexed by it. And I said, well, that's the way we do things in the U.S. I'm not saying it's always the easiest way to do things, but it's the way we do it. And as you also noted, Kathy, if you sell to the United States government, you have an obligation of 7% employment of people with disabilities. And since most companies do sell to the United States government, since it is the largest procurer of goods, most people have to comply to that. And I was talking to a corporation the other day, a very large, well-known corporation, which I'm not going to mention, and they had no idea about this. And they were saying, well, why do we have to think about this in regards to employment? Why can't we just think about this from the lens of making sure that our customers or consumers with disabilities have access to our information? And I said, well, it's okay, you can start different ways, but the reality is, I know for sure you, on this particular corporation, I know for sure that you sell to the United States government, so I'm just going to go ahead and let you know you're already breaking multiple laws. And I only say that as a U.S. person talking to another U.S. corporation, but they had no idea. And sometimes I wonder, with the success of AXSchat and a lot of other things, still not understand, number one, that you do have to employ people with disabilities. Number two, they add value to your workforce. Number three, people with disabilities are not broken. Number four, if I can go on and on and on. And the good news is, service providers that can really help you be successful with this will also help you in, a lot of times, improve your processes and your policies so it becomes better for everybody in the workforce, not just for people with disabilities. So you talked a little bit about this already, but when y'all go in to talk to these employers, you really are looking at it a very holistic way of how do you certainly employing people with disabilities, but also how can this, help the corporation with other diverse groups as well as just other employees as well. Sorry for the long comment and question, but
no, that's good. And just to go back at the very beginning, Val Stroll is a very good friend of ours, so I'm glad that she did introduce us. She's awesome in her work that she does. As far as going with the companies, it is an entire holistic approach. That it's not. I have found, and I am just one person out of many that does this. So, but what I have been finding is that really when I go in with that approach, and it's not just about hiring people, with disabilities, but it's also about their customer base. And it's also about their associates and their employees they have now that may have family members with disabilities. And when you go in with that approach, I think that people kind of calm down a little bit because they don't want to always be about the federal government. And I don't want to always make this about the federal government. This just makes sense. It makes economic sense. It makes sense for the communities. It makes sense for the employers that they already have. It makes sense for their customer base. So I take that approach with the companies to help them look at it in a different way. What I want to walk away with when I am with a company is that they are looking at disabilities differently. They're not thinking of disabilities as someone just with a physical or an intellectual disability, that there are other disabilities out there as well. 71% I think of people with disabilities have what they call the hidden disabilities. So I want them to know this. I want them to be educated because I think everybody wants to do good and they want to do, they want to hire great workforce. It's just that they get scared and that fear and stigma stands in the way of them going after what they really need to think about when they think about disabilities.
I agree.
Did I answer your question well enough?
Yeah, you did. Well, it was a very long worded question, and I did that because sometimes I like to set the stage about how things are so different here in the United States, and our differences actually complicate things really, really, a lot. And I really like that you brought up the point about the invisible and the hidden disabilities, because a lot of times when I'm speaking to corporations, they get stuck and they think I'm just talking about a person that's in a wheelchair or maybe somebody that's blind. And I always remind them, I feel pretty confident that you've already employed people with disabilities in your workforce. Now, you might have to ask yourself why those employees don't feel comfortable talking to you about their accommodation needs or their support needs. But the reality is you've already done this, because the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you're looking at it from the US lens, is a pretty broad definition. And so I think that was a really important point that you brought up. Neil, I know you wanted to ask a question, so let me turn the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you. We've talked about the hidden disabilities, and that's really important to me and to Deborah as people that are on the spectra. But I think one of the things that struck me was you were saying people didn't want to come forward, and I quite often see that there are people in leadership positions who have a disability but don't want to talk about it, and yet they're exactly the kind of role models we need to show the rest of the organization, look, it's okay, you can succeed, you can have a disability and be a leader. So how do you address that kind of reticence on the behalf of the really people at the top? And I've seen quite a few that are board level people that have a disability, that will talk about it privately, but don't want to go on the record in their own company, despite the fact that perhaps it would be the thing that really sets the blue touch paper alight to inclusion within their organization.
You bring up a great point. I have not personally been involved with a company that has that on a very high level, but I've had it on more of a management, the lower management level, that I've tried to encourage them to reach out, and to make that known. However, he did during one of our disability awareness trainings. He let all his staff know that he had a disability, which was great, because when we go in for these trainings, we always say it starts at the top. If your leader doesn't buy into disability inclusion awareness or a disability initiative, or really looking at different strategies to hire people, including people with disabilities, then it's never going to go anywhere, because the leadership sets that tone, is how we really believe in. And as just you were saying, Neil, it's so important if they do have a disability to let others know. However, I'll go back again and say, I think it's the fear and the stigma. I think so much is people think of a disability in a bad way, and not so much as they used to years ago, but still they do. And I think that stigma in their own world is stopping them, because they've maybe seen, how others have been treated, or how maybe even their boss doesn't want to know, even if they're high up. So it's that fear and stigma, I think, that is still there, and we still have a lot to work to do on that, with training to say, hey, it's okay. But, getting rid of that fear and stigma is going to be one of the number one things I believe is going to help get that message across to those leaders.
So with you all the way, and I think that obviously reducing the fear and stigma comes from those executive leaders, hopefully, but perhaps if we go back to our last week's guest, we had Kate Nash on, and she was talking about disability employee networks. So maybe it's those kind of things that maybe help people to feel comfortable to come out of their shells. Because I can see what's happened is people have masked for years. So they've hidden their disability, they've climbed the corporate ladder, they've been successful. They're now afraid that could all unravel, and it's something that people have done throughout history. We all mask, we all paint a picture of ourselves that is perfect, on social media. All of the flowers in my garden are perfect. My dog is always white, he never rolls in mud. The reality is different, but I guess it's that comfort level, and I do think it requires people to step forward and come out and talk about stuff. And I do talk about it as coming out, because I think that as such it's very there's great analogies to be taken from the gay rights movement, that there's still this kind of fear, opprobrium around disability, but it's only by being open about it and being successful and talking about it that we can really challenge that. So I'm out, Deborah's out, the rest of us are, trying to shout about it and do it in a positive way. So thank you for your efforts. And I know that Deborah's got another question.
Yeah, I think that, it's about normalizing, because the reality is we live in these, fragile human bodies. And I think people, often forget that only about 20% of the population of people with disabilities were born with a disability, like my daughter, who was born with trisomy 21, also known as Down syndrome. I'm writing a book on that. But it is about normalizing. And one thing that I'm seeing, obviously, as we age, we acquire disabilities, and the numbers they're staggering. Anywhere from 80 to 86% of disabilities you acquired after birth. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she works for a large company, a very large multinational company that helps companies with real estate and future of work and stuff like that. And she said that in this one particular company, that the CEO of the company, they're doing away with offices, and instead they're, it's future of the work. It's real interesting, and everybody's in cubicles and workstations to support conversations. But the CEO of the company is profoundly deaf. And so he uses technology that allows him to do his job, and it makes more sense for him, in a lot of reasons, to be in an office where he can use this technology, since he is profoundly deaf. Now, what they don't talk about is how brilliant, obviously, this CEO leader is, and everything that they bring to the table. And as he's aged, he's acquired, more of a hearing loss. We know that brilliant leaders like Jenny LaFleury from Microsoft is profoundly deaf, but named as one of the top 50 leaders by Fast Company. So another example is there is a gentleman that lost his leg due to a motorcycle accident, who is now the COO of a major multinational corporation. And so what we have to somehow do as societies, and we're doing this on AXSchat, is we have to normalize what it means to be disability. So as Neil talks about him and I coming out, struggle with depression, and sometimes it's pretty in my face, and also ADHD, the hyper focused part, which makes me a great worker, but maybe sometimes annoying to the family members. And Neil has dyslexia, so and Antonio's wife has a disability. So it's almost like you start counting up who has a disability, because, it's just human beings, and there's really few of us that are not included. And so I think that's a very important message for employers. And it sounds like that's something that y'all do whenever you're, strategically consulting with the clients that y'all work with. But do you find that more people are willing to step out and say who they are and really identify the entire sum of all the parts that make up the person that they are?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think, and you make such great points, Deborah, that I think the conversation, as you are doing now with AXSchat, it has to start with the conversation. And if you really sit down in a room, I hate to keep harping and going back on the fear and stigma, but it's so
Right.
true
Right.
in the conversation, because if I ask everybody in a room, please raise your hand or stand up if you yourself have a disability, one of your family members have a disability. And if almost everybody in the room is standing up. I mean, out of 25 people, I think there's maybe 2 that are sitting down, or 3, or you have a friend. I may say you have a friend that's family has a disability,
Right.
but someone has a disability. There are people standing up, and I say, look around, because if we don't start this conversation, and if you don't address what's stopping you from any kind of stigmas or fears you may have, then we're never going to get past this initiative, or of you really being inclusive in your workplace. It just, that conversation piece, which is so awesome about this AXSchat, is that you're allowing people to feel comfortable. And we need to do this. We need to get on to making those companies look around at who they're hiring, that they're probably hiring people with disabilities and they just don't know it, because
Right.
these people, but how those people may feel not comfortable because of the work environment, or they may hear of them making fun of others. So a perfect point to that is last week when I was traveling and doing some training, I had one of the employees say, or one of the managers asked me, do all of our employees get to take this training? Because I think it's important when we start hiring people with disabilities that all employees know, just aware, of disability awareness, not just for us as managers.
I agree. And also, I like to point out that this is not just about employing people with disability. This is about retention. And also, I believe all over the world, but there seems to be even more of a emphasis. And Antonio just noted, this is also about employees that are aging. Right. Aging in place. But this is also about social responsibility, because what we're seeing as brands, national and multinational brands, worry about their image, one thing that is expected by many members of society is that they do the right thing by their communities. And one way that you can show that you're a socially responsible company that cares about social impact is by hiring a diverse workforce that includes people with disabilities. Have you seen that companies are asking more about the social impact part of this question?
That's funny. I haven't, because I think a lot of companies already do that. I think that what they don't, that's kind of a twofold. Yes, they do, and yes, they don't, because I think social responsibility, they think of, when they think of diversity, they don't really come out and think of disabilities. So I think the awareness of the disability in the marketplace, they've never really thought of. But I think that as companies are more and more looking to diversify not only the workforce and include people with disabilities, but becoming socially responsible in their community, what does that mean? So I'm not hesitating of the answer. I just think it goes both ways on what they as a company think of social responsibility, us helping them understand that social responsibility includes people with disabilities. That is where I don't think companies think about. I don't think they are they want to be inclusive for all, believe me, but sometimes disabilities just isn't in there, and it's how do we keep that open to make sure that that is part of their plan and their strategies, because if it's not, it should be in it should be in their social and their community responsibilities.
So just a quick one, because I know Antonio's got a question. We do a lot of CSR reporting within Atos, which is where I'm employed and Antonio's employed, and we report on things like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and GRI, which is the Global Reporting Indices. These are big reporting indices for corporate social responsibility, and you should know that within that there are references, particularly within GRI, to UN CRPD. So it's clearly a measurable part of CSR in the major indices. So you can take that to your clients and say, look, actually, if you want to score highly, it's not just me saying this. These are the major analyst houses that are saying, actually, this is part of it. Antonio, sorry for stealing your thunder.
No, but thank you. Absolutely.
And we know that there are a few things that always generate curiosity in our community, and one of them is try to understand the cultural environment of our guests. So what like you from Kate is to describe us Indiana and how companies are looking into this. Now if you look back, let's say 10 years where and today, what you see, what changes are you able to identify in the community around you?
In Indianapolis, I love my community and I love our city and our state. However, they're not as forward thinking as other states are. So, I'm working on a national level, not a global, but a national level right now. And I compare those states with the state of Indiana. Indiana has a great cultural environment. However, I'm going to go back to the statement is I don't think that we are where we need to be, especially when we talk about diversity. People don't want to think of diversity, that disabilities is part of diversity. They do and they don't. They want to, but are they really? And I think that that's a really good question for a lot of other companies. For you to know Indiana, we've got some work to do, as if every state does. But I feel that we're making those changes. As with any changes, some work better than others, and some are a little bit slower than others. We have some very major companies and corporations here, global companies actually, in Indianapolis, and I know they are trying and making great strides. Really looking into hiring people with disabilities and including them in their initiatives. So I think when we can get those major companies involved in the cities that their corporate offices are, we can make a bigger difference. And I'm looking forward to that in Indiana because we are really trying that with the Business Leadership Network here, is to really connect and get others started to do more disability awareness. But it's a great state, but we've got a ways to go. Did that answer your question, Antonio?
Thank you so much. Yes, it does. You were mentioning the business leadership community, am I right?
Part of the USBLN. Are you all familiar with the United States Business Leadership Network? Yeah.
Okay, so how does the community networks, are they organized around that, or is there local meetups? What is the space where all these forward-thinking companies are able to find ways to work together and network in order to influence the space around them?
So the Business Leadership Network is that. It's a business-to-business networking, and it focuses just on people with disabilities. It just actually was relaunched here in Indianapolis. There was one a few years ago, and it kind of went away, but now it's back, and it's making great strides. And and I'm seeing, as I was just talking to you, from one of the major corporations that is global corporations that are here in Indianapolis, they are part of it, and they're now starting to reach out and try to do a coalition of a collaboration with other organizations that help people with disabilities get hired. So they're doing some outreach. So this is starting to, it's baby steps, but we can see it starting to happen, which, you know, I get excited about. And I feel that when we can even see something little like this happen, we don't know where it's going to take us in the next year.
Great. Antonio, did you want to follow up, or are you?
No, it's no. We know that we always people always like to know the differences, and we all, and by our experience over the time that we run AXSchat, we always realize that there's no one is doing anything at the level of perfection, but we are able to identify best practices from different parts of the world. So some people are working very good things in one areas, others in others. So we see that there's always gaps in different areas. We have that in Ireland, we have that in Portugal, but from there's always something good that you are able to bring from the different communities working in this space.
Wait. If you don't, can I just mention one other thing about when you mentioned best practices? One of the major things we have found is that companies, they want to do outreach to people with disabilities, but however, they really don't know where even to go. So, part of what we do is helping them connect in the community. And I think that's one thing everybody could do. Doesn't take us to do it, but learning how to do that, because I think there's so many different, not only just organizations, but just a lot of schools, colleges that I think recruiters don't really realize that are out there to help them cast a wider net, if you will, in their recruitment strategies.
No, I see something like that also happening here in Ireland, especially in the recruitment space, where agencies are still trying to learn how to deal with hiring people with disabilities, and sometimes we notice that sometimes they are very uncomfortable with questions because they feel that they need to learn more in order to be able to join that type of conversations.
Right.
Deborah, you had a question? Okay, we're not able to hear you. You're probably in mute.
Okay,
know,
sorry about that.
Good.
Yeah, sorry. My mic. It was my mic, not me. Oh, okay, it was me. But you mentioned the USBLN, and I was proud to serve on the USBLN, their board of directors for many years, and I also have been involved in helping other BLNs as well. And I just think organizations like the BLN, the USBLN, are so important because it's business to business conversations. And I know that I'm also supporting the International Labor Organization that has a business and disability network that once again is encouraging multinational corporations to really have these safe conversations. And Neil, and I'll pass this over to Neil and let him talk about it, but Neil is also involved with some employer to employer efforts in the United Kingdom that are having powerful results. I think it's one thing that I saw when I come from corporate America, from the banking industry, but when I first joined this industry to just help as a parent, one thing I realized is that there seemed the corporations, the employer invited to the conversations. And I would say, why are the employers not here? How can we be talking about employing people with disabilities and the employers aren't here? Well, we invite them, but they don't want to come. Yeah. It's like, really? Well, I don't think that's, yeah. How are you asking them to invite? How are you asking them to attend? And I'll just give you a little story. This is a few years old, but meeting late, and I've been an employer for many years of individuals with disabilities, and I came in late to the meeting, and somebody was saying, oh, employers, they never want to include people with disabilities in the workforce, or at the time, wounded warriors. We were talking about that. So I said to the gentleman, I said, well, pretend I'm an employer, and I hadn't introduced myself. Pretend I'm an employer and start this discussion with me. And so he said, okay, now keep in mind, we are in the United States. He said, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, do you have any barriers to employment? And so I said, okay. I said, well, the conversation's over because you just threatened me. He said, no, I didn't. I said, yes, you did. You threatened me with, and I started rolling out our laws, the ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, and he's like, okay, now wait a minute, who are you? I don't really start the conversation that way. And I thought, well, I bet you really do start the conversation that way. And that's why often we see the employers are afraid of these conversations. I think we're moving away from that. But I think organizations like the USBLN and the organizations that Neil has been involved with, they really help break down some of those barriers. And Neil, I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit. I mean, I know that we had last week, once again, Kate from the Purple Space on here, who is a brilliant woman. But I think that the work that EDF is doing also, we should just take a minute to talk about, Neil, and then pass the mic over to you to talk about.
Sure. So we've been working with the Business Disability Forum for a while now, quite a few years, and it has a really powerful technology task force which is made up of members of large organizations that are working in a sort of pragmatic way to improve the accessibility of their working environments, their product offerings, etc. And it's a non-judgmental forum of businesses, and even though some of us compete in day-to-day life, we all help each other when it comes to accessibility. So it's really quite powerful. We've been bringing together the collective procurement power of these businesses as well to engage with suppliers, to make them take note of the size of the market, etc. Because together as members, we employ 20% of the UK workforce, and that has quite a power when you're saying, well, this is our purchasing power, this is something we want to engage with you on, but we want to do it in a positive way. And I really believe that it's that positive engagement that really gets people's attention, that coupled with obviously the power of the market, because money does talk.
Yes.
Yeah, and so are you finding the same thing when you're working with these employers in Indiana?
Yes, so it's funny. We've worked with just a few employers from Indiana. We work with mostly from other states. But just to go back a little bit on the BLN, I am helping relaunch the Indianapolis BLN. So I have been, yes, I've been. It's been a great experience, and so far we're making some great strides in relaunching that, so the businesses here can really connect. I want to go and talk a little bit, if you don't mind, and it answers this question in a roundabout way. But the partnerships, as you brought up, Deborah, a minute ago, it's really important for, as you said, for businesses to be able to have some place to go and talk, and that's why the BLN is so wonderful. Because sometimes the organizations come across as exactly what you said, and it is threatening. And then that's when that fear and stigma even starts to come in a little bit more. We've also found that through our communications with developing these partnerships between a business and the local community that helps support people with disabilities, whether it's a school, whether it's a veteran organization, whether it's whoever it is, sometimes we need to help the company understand the best practices and who these companies or organizations are and what to expect. And then on the same side, I feel that there needs to be some training on the partnership organization side as well on how to actually read a job description. Because I think there's a real disconnect, and sometimes that's what's not happening, is that in the disability community, in the corporate level, that there's not this the coach or whoever's helping this person is not really looking if what the company is needing. A perfect example is technology. Someone says computer skills, and they list the computer skills, and somebody else just sees the particular skills as computer, and they think their client has it when it's really an IT specialist. I know that seems extreme, but those are some disconnects that I think that the Business Leadership Network and other leaderships networks, as Neil was talking, I think those conversations need to happen with your partner organizations, because I think the partner organizations in the community sometimes don't quite get it either. And there's this miscommunication happening somewhere along the lines.
Great answer. So thank you so much. We've reached the end of our half an hour. It's been a pleasure chatting with you and learned a lot as always. Look forward to you joining us on Twitter tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.